The disturbing images of ISIS terrorists we've been seeing recently have one thing in common. The jihadists are almost always male. But that doesn't mean women aren't being lured as well. Girls are being enlisted to become wives and mothers, dubbed bedroom recruits because they're drawn right from their homes. It's recruitment by social media, and it's hard to stop. And as Vashi Capellos reports, girls are being lured from right here in Canada.
Can you hear me, yeah?
Yeah, can you hear me?
What you're watching is a Skype call.
Would you meet me at the border, or is somebody going to meet me there?
Yeah.
It's with a man claiming to be an ISIS fighter living in Syria.
It's what you do. You say that, you know, you're going to have a weekend sleepover where you basically start from Friday evening.
He's talking to this woman who he believes is a 15-year-old Canadian girl from Edmonton.
You get on a flight to Calgary. You know Calgary, right?
Yeah.
When you get to the flight on Calgary, you fly to Germany, to Frankfurt.
He's coaching her on how to deceive her parents, get on a plane, and travel to Turkey, and then Syria to join ISIS.
You go to Istanbul.
What airport should I go to? Is just the one in Istanbul? Is there more than one?
You never left the country?
I've never left the country, but I've flown before.
But he doesn't want her to join ISIS as a fighter. He wants this 15-year-old to be his wife.
So that's how it works. And when I pick you up, I'm going to be picking you up as my wife.
If this man was luring an underage girl in Canada, that would be a serious crime. He could be arrested, charged, and convicted. But he's not in Canada. He's an ISIS fighter in Syria, luring a teen online, and Canadian laws can't stop him.
But my biggest concern is you getting out of Istanbul without your parents going crazy, you know?
How dangerous is a guy like that?
But if you can get a whole weekend to you, that's good.
It's quite dangerous for younger girls in the West.
Okay.
The flights that you look for is the shortest flying time, you know?
We took the recording of this Skype call to Amarnath Amarasingham, an expert in foreign fighters. He's shocked to see the video, but says this scenario is actually not surprising.
No, it's very easy for a young girl in Canada to set up a Twitter account and be in direct communication with fighters overseas.
That's what this 15-year-old girl did.
If we get married, we would have our own house, right?
Oh, yeah.
But she isn't real. She's actually a 16:9 producer.
Is there a house that I go to when I'm in Turkey, or?
Because you're so young, I can't really have you stay in a house.
But this girl is real, and she's only 13.
And raising kids that can read the.
We found her on Twitter, communicating with members of ISIS. We wanted to talk with her. She agreed to meet with a 16:9 producer, and we captured it all on hidden camera. She's in Canada. We can't say where. We'll call her Farah.
Have you watched any videos from Donna? Yeah. Before? Yeah. It's like my favorite. Yeah. Like, I don't know, I'm just in love with it. Like, I think I memorized lines and stuff.
Farah says she got interested in ISIS last fall, watching videos that glorify ISIS fighters.
The brothers were relentless in their attack.
A lot of these girls are attracted by the stories of these guys and their machine guns and their AK-47s and their life in Syria and you know, standing up for what they believe in and doing what they believe in. So I think there's a kind of attractiveness there for a lot of these girls.
At 13, she's talking to violent jihadis online. Grown men known for bombings and beheadings. But far from being afraid of them, she's gushing.
You know, I go so much He's from Canada. I just, he was on 30, but I used to stalk him like all day.
I think there's this kind of heroism to this whole thing. There's an adventurism to this whole thing. And there's a kind of cool factor to this whole thing that, you know, the same way that teenagers might be attracted to extreme sports or may be attracted to Justin Bieber. It's a kind of, there's a kind of sexiness to ISIS at the moment.
Amarnath, an expert on foreign fighters, watches ISIS fighters online. He knows who the main recruiters are. We showed him 13-year-old Farah's Twitter profile. We wanted to know if this underage girl was at risk of being lured overseas to join ISIS.
When you look through her social media profile, what was the impression it left you with?
It told me that even though she's 13 and kind of new to this whole thing, that she quickly became plugged into the main actors and quickly became plugged into the main narratives of the Islamic State and kind of fit right in.
Farah didn't tell us if there was a particular ISIS fighter who was telling her to come over. And while she says she's considering going to Syria, she has no plans to get married.
I don't really care about marriage. What I really have interest in is teaching kids about Sharia law.
She may not care about marrying a fighter, but if this 13-year-old Canadian girl is convinced to get on a plane and go to Syria, she might not have a choice.
It's often said that once they're there, you kind of have to get married, and that's a narrative that's put forth by a lot of girls that are over there already. They say, don't expect to come here and lead a single life, so expect to get married pretty soon, expect to take on your family duties very soon.
How can you not say that's the truth?
In Canada, marrying an underage girl is illegal. Luring her overseas is human trafficking.
Is this girl a victim?
I think she's very much a victim. I don't think at that age you're kind of fully equipped to make independent decisions, and especially choices like traveling overseas and joining militant movements. And so she's very much a victim of circumstance and very much a victim of ISIS propaganda.
Sometimes that propaganda comes with a female face. Women recruiting young women, all in the name of sisterhood. Their online names use the Arabic word meaning mother of, Hussein, Laith, Darda, all Western women living and recruiting in Syria.
One of them is a Scottish woman from Glasgow. Her name is Laith, who runs a fairly elaborate website where she has advice for pages and pages about how to make the journey to Turkey and how to make the journey to Syria, what to bring. Then there are other women like Sally Jones from the UK, who goes by Hussein on Twitter, who's very much plugged into a lot of the women and girls on their social media profile.
They communicate on Twitter, Facebook, instant messaging apps, and blog sites like Tumblr, reaching out to young women, convincing them they're needed as wives and mothers for the future of the Islamic State.
And then you come along and you say, hey, you were a nobody there. You can be a somebody here. It's exciting, that you're part of building a nation or a state in it, and you throw some religious terms in there, and all of a sudden you think that it's got some righteousness or some favor with God incorporated with it. And so much for the sacredness of marriage there, like you don't even know who you're going to marry. You just want to marry some, a boy, and you're right. I know what we're seeing more and more is that, these young girls aren't just expected to stay at home and produce babies and make, bread and toast all day, but they're expected to either sacrifice themselves, be suicide bombers, or to engage in an armed conflict.
Next, answering the call.
Is there anything that when you're making the journey you're supposed to bring?
I don't know. Can you bring some cash with you?
To be an ISIS wife.
February 17th, 2015. 3 teen girls from East London board a flight at Gatwick Airport bound for Istanbul. Their plan was to get to Syria to join ISIS.
The girls caught on Gatwick's CCTV cameras: Khadija Sultana, 16, Amira Abbasi, 15, Shamima Begum, 15, using her 17-year-old sister's passport. Right away, British police released these pictures to the world in hopes someone might find the girls and return them home before it was too late.
A few days later, these images, broadcast on Turkish television, showing the teen girls boarding a bus to the Turkish-Syrian border. If they made it into ISIS territory, a rogue state, it would be nearly impossible to get these underage girls out and home to their families.
The story of Khadiza, Amira, and Shamima has been headline news for weeks.
But in Canada, a very similar scenario unfolded last October. 3 teen girls ages 15 to 18 left Canada to marry ISIS fighters. The story barely made a ripple.
So from what I understand, that their recruitment came via the internet. The belief is that someone, over the internet, so no, not somebody in Canada, basically sold them, that this is wonderful, this is your obligation, it's blissful here, it's righteous here.
Hossein Hamdani is a lawyer and member of the National Cross-Cultural Roundtable on Security. He was called in by the RCMP to liaise with the girls' families. He's one of the few people who knows what happened in this incident.
What we know of them is 2 sisters and a cousin, Somali background, living in Brampton. They're in high school, but they're intending to drop out of high school. One of them was recruited online and then convinced the other 2 that this is something that they want to do.
And so they did. In Canada, a minor isn't required to have an adult's consent to get on the plane, leave the country. In no time, the 3 teens were in flight, en route to Istanbul, the last stop before getting whisked into ISIS territory. Back at home, it wasn't long before the girls' parents realized something was horribly wrong.
The parents realized that they were missing, contacted CSIS and the RCMP, were able to track them on the plane to Istanbul.
The RCMP called Turkish authorities, who were ready and waiting when the girls' flight arrived in Istanbul.
And when they got to the Istanbul airport, that's where the Turkish authorities captured, arrested, returned, deported them back to Canada, and they've been here ever since.
The teen girls, their apparent plan to marry ISIS fighters thwarted, found themselves back on Canadian soil and facing the RCMP.
Again, they're 15, 16 years old. You're young and you're stupid and you're foolish and you make mistakes. And I think that these girls weren't ideologues. They were just girls who made a mistake and maybe fully didn't appreciate the consequences of that mistake. They were young girls, probably wrapped up in the excitement of it.
The RCMP won't comment on the incident and whether anything illegal was done, but Canadian law can't do much to prevent girls from going to the Islamic State to become wives of ISIS fighters. In this case, at least 2 of the Brampton teens were underage. It's illegal to marry a minor in Canada. But even if they were of legal age, it's not a crime to marry a criminal, whether it's a bank robber or a terrorist.
Is it illegal to marry a terrorist in Canada?
No. So, facilitating a terrorist activity or participating with a terrorist group or instructing an individual to engage in a terrorist activity, those are all crimes. Having social relations with someone who may engage in a terrorist activity or who may be participating with a terrorist group is not a crime.
Craig Forsyth is an associate professor at the University of Ottawa Law School. He's also an expert in Canada's anti-terrorism laws.
In the course of those social relations, you may do something in support of your spouse that amounts to facilitation of a terrorist activity or participating with a terrorist group. So it's not about the nature of the social relations, it's about your conduct.
16 by 9 went undercover to find out what possible conduct a wife of an ISIS fighter could get drawn into.
We literally live for the deen and we die for the deen, That's exactly the aim over here.
We set up a test.
A Skype call with a man claiming to be an ISIS fighter in Syria.
So we live for al-akhirah.
He thinks he's talking to a 15-year-old girl in Edmonton. He wants to marry her and tells her how to get to Syria and what to bring.
Right, you bring some cash with you?
Like what kind of cash? Like what currency?
It's always good to have extra cash to just fall back on.
He asks her to bring extra cash to Syria as backup.
Fall back on in case anything goes wrong.
Now listen carefully to what this ISIS fighter advises next.
And also buy you, a handgun, for your protection, this kind of thing,
Okay.
He wants this Canadian teen girl to carry a handgun. He tells her women in ISIS territory carry them for protection against enemy attacks.
Do most people carry handguns?
Yeah.
And not only that, he tells her women in ISIS carry more than just a gun. She'll need a suicide belt, too.
Yeah, the women here, they carry handguns, they carry the belt, for protection. I mean, not that it happens anything, but, it's always good to be protected, because we always have enemies,
As Craig Forsees says, marrying a fighter is not a crime for any Canadian woman. But using a gun or having a suicide belt, suddenly wife becomes terrorist and criminal under Canadian law.
The risk is, of course, that it's not just come over here and be the spouse, it's come over here and be the spouse and carry the munitions, or take up arms, or do something more proactive in terms of your own personal behavior that crosses that line into terrorist conduct or terrorist activity in its own right. There, just like anyone else, those individuals would then be amenable to prosecution, assuming you get your hands on them.
And that's the problem. Once inside ISIS-controlled territory, a rogue state, there's nothing in Canadian law that can get these women back or prevent them from leaving in the first place. And as 16x9 found out, female recruitment to ISIS is a phenomenon that is percolating here in Canada.
Some of them take over Mocha and everything, and that's when it's a sign of Canada.
In this hidden camera video, a 13-year-old and her 15-year-old relative tell a 16x9 producer that they want to go to Syria to join ISIS.
And how you're going to become illegal, and the doors of hijab will close. So it's making it look further. Yeah, it's just scary, because we're going to be stuck in the West. That's why I'm really worried about. I've had 3 years now that we were already there, and I got.
Next, Canada's move to stem the tide.
We will criminalize the promotion of terrorism and also shut down the website.
Every time we shut down a website, another 2 will pop up.
Women and girls are the latest wave of recruits to answer the call of the Islamic State. The message is to come and help build a new nation as wives and mothers.
Well, I used to follow people just randomly. I was always interested. Some playing video games, COD and SS and stuff like that. It just got me interested in weapons and stuff. And then I started narrowing books about topics around fighting jihad and
Recruitment is happening online, on computers in girls' bedrooms. This 13-year-old told a 16x9 producer she's considering making hijra, or the migration to ISIS territory.
And that just got me more interested, and then I found out about Dola and like I say,
16x9 wanted to find out what laws Canada has in place to stop girls like this 13-year-old from traveling to ISIS territory. We went to Ottawa to interview Public Safety Minister Stephen Blaney.
What can Canada do to prevent women and girls from being recruited by ISIS?
We need first to prevent those radicalized individuals from being radicalized. Then we have to prevent them from traveling and respond to an eventual threat that has materialized.
But prevention did nothing to stop an estimated 15 Canadian women from traveling to join ISIS so far. And prevention did nothing to stop the 3 Brampton teenagers who got on a plane and headed to ISIS territory, getting as far as Istanbul.
Thankfully, their family was able to contact services, and the girls were stopped on their flight as they landed in Turkey. brought back.
Hussein Hamdani is a member of the National Cross-Cultural Roundtable on Security.
One of the problems of having ISIS on the front page of every paper, and one of the problems of having, our government talking about the fear that ISIS is and the threat, is to a small demographic of people, it's kind of sexy, it's kind of interesting.
But what young recruits might think is sexy, the government wants to make criminal.
The federal government has a new law up its sleeve, Bill C-51, better known as the Anti-Terrorism Bill, announced just months after the attack on Parliament Hill last October.
These measures are designed to help authorities stop planned attacks, criminalize the promotion of terrorism, and prevent terrorists from traveling abroad and recruiting others.
How specifically, though, does C-51 prevent a young girl or a young woman from being lured by someone in ISIS, perhaps over in Syria?
We don't have the legal authority to shut down websites who are promoting terrorism targeted. So that's the first thing of the bill. We will criminalize the promotion of terrorism and also shut down the website.
But shutting down websites, we found out, is much like trying to hold back the waves. When one user profile gets shut down for objectionable content, another pops up a few days later. This Twitter user is on her 6th profile, and this one is on a 10th.
We can't shut down every single website. Every time we shut down a website, another 2 will pop up.
Getting shut down can even be a badge of honor for ISIS supporters. Powers under Bill C-51 aren't limited, though, to shutting down communication. Charges could be laid if words or images support or promote terrorism, no matter who's doing the talking.
I'm wondering, do you see a young girl, a minor, recruited by ISIS as a victim?
When we are dealing with a criminal, we have to change their behavior. When we are dealing with a potential terrorist, we have to change their beliefs.
Is it hard to see a 13-year-old girl, though, as a terrorist?
Well, we need to be able to make sure that those beliefs won't translate into action.
So pictures like these ones that we found all over the internet showing support for ISIS could result in criminal charges if the bill is passed. Craig Forsees is an expert in Canada's anti-terrorism laws.
Is it a given that just because somebody glorifies terrorism or promotes it or, rah-rahs it on Twitter, that they will be radicalized towards violence?
No. Okay, so if that were true, we'd be besieged by terrorist incidences because, of course, cyberspace is full of obnoxious comments. So there's no close correlation and certainly no causal link between making radicalized statements and then radicalization to violence. There is no empirical basis to arrive at that conclusion.
During our investigation, we discovered young women and girls are being persuaded to post images like this one, found on a Twitter page, the so-called ISIS finger, meaning one state. It's a kind of initiation.
You would say, I believe in doing.
In this call with our undercover 16:9 producer, a man claiming to be a jihadi fighter in Syria asked for the photos, presumably as proof that his soon-to-be bride was loyal to the Islamic State.
This is a serious to test your clothing.
You couldn't imagine, 10, 15 years ago, because now the social media technology and the access is very much at your fingertips.
Instead of helping, researcher Amarnath Amarasingham says Bill C-51 could force radicalizing women and girls even further underground.
And instead of reintegrating them, they kind of become isolated, right? Now families and communities don't want anything to do with this person. Parents tell their children not to hang out with them anymore because there could be law enforcement attention on their families. And so it kind of has a ripple effect where people become more isolated and families become more isolated in their communities.
Is it sort of a lost cause once they're in Syria?
The sooner we can intervene in the process, the lesser are the impact for the individual.
So you're saying unless we intervene early, once they've left, there's really not a lot to do.
That's why we all have a duty. If we are aware of an individual who is falling into radicalization, to report it to the authorities so we can stop this from happening and reduce the impact of that path in which the individual could be going down.
Meantime, ISIS fighters are online, luring young women and girls who are hoping to join in building the new Islamic State.
I'll get someone to collect you from the airport when you land, and what they'll do is basically they'll transport you all the way down to the border, and when you cross the border, I'll be waiting for you the other side.
And we are continuing the discussion on this story online in a live blog Sunday, March 15th from 2 to 4 Eastern. To join us, just log on to global16by9.com. We'll be right back.
Video, but says this scenario is actually not surprising.
You know, it's very easy for a young girl in Canada to set up a Twitter account and be in direct communication with fighters overseas.
That's what this 15-year-old girl did.
If we get married, we would have our own house, right?
Oh, yeah.
But she isn't real. She's actually a 16:9 producer.
Is there a house that I go to when I'm in Turkey, or?
Because you're so young, I can't really have you stay in a house.
But this girl is real, and she's only 13.
The disturbing images of ISIS terrorists we've been seeing recently have one thing in common. The jihadists are almost always male. But that doesn't mean women aren't being lured as well. Girls are being enlisted to become wives and mothers, dubbed bedroom recruits because they're drawn right from their homes. It's recruitment by social media, and it's hard to stop. And as Vashi Capellos reports, girls are being lured from right here in Canada.
Can you hear me, yeah?
Yeah, can you hear me?
What you're watching is a Skype call.
Would you meet me at the border, or is somebody going to meet me there?
Yeah.
It's with a man claiming to be an ISIS fighter living in Syria.
It's what you do. You say that, you know, you're going to have a weekend sleepover where you basically start from Friday evening.
He's talking to this woman who he believes is a 15-year-old Canadian girl from Edmonton.
You get on a flight to Calgary. You know Calgary, right?
Yeah.
When you get to the flight on Calgary, you fly to Germany, to Frankfurt.
He's coaching her on how to deceive her parents, get on a plane, and travel in Canada. He's an ISIS fighter in Syria, luring a teen online, and Canadian laws can't stop him.
But my biggest concern is you getting to obviously get out of Istanbul without your parents going crazy, you know?
How dangerous is a guy like that?
But if you can get a whole weekend to you, that's good.
It's quite dangerous for younger girls in the West.
Okay.
The flights that you look for, it's the shortest flying time, you know?
We took the recording of this Skype call to Amarnath Amarasingham, an expert in foreign fighters. He's shocked to see them to Turkey
and then Syria to join ISIS.
You go to Istanbul.
What airport should I go to? Is just the one in Istanbul? Is there more than one?
You never left the country?
I've never left the country, but I've flown before.
But he doesn't want her to join ISIS as a fighter. He wants this 15-year-old to be his wife.
So that's how it works. And when I pick you up, I'm going to be picking you up as my wife.
If this man was luring an underage girl in Canada, that would be a serious crime. He could be arrested, charged, and convicted. But he's not.